asking my colleagues to support this amendment because it is an amendment that ensures that we put minority, women-owned, disadvantaged, and small businesses to work under this legislation.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. What purpose does the gentleman from Iowa rise?
I thank the chairman. We'll be more than happy to accept the amendment.
Could the gentleman
Further
yield?
discussion on the amendment?
Could the gentleman yield for me to...
If not, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Texas.
I was just going to thank...
As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed will say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The clerk will read.
This Brown is.
But we have two existing bonds.
Right.
Is he not going to offer them?
I don't. Jack Beeson just talked to him.
Yeah.
He's got the big one in front.
Do I need to go find out?
Is he or isn't he? Right. The amendment.
The clerk will read.
Page 4, line 3, financial management capital, $10 million to remain available through September 30th, 2014.
For what purpose does the gentleman for Virginia rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Connolly of Virginia, page 4, line 6, after the first dollar amount, insert reduced by $5 million. Page 35, line 7, after the dollar amount, insert increased by $5 million.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
I thank the chair. Mr. Chairman, my amendment underscores the point that we need to be doing more, not less, to combat the dangerous habit of distracted driving on our nation's roadways. Earlier this evening, we voted on a motion with strut-count freeze in the highway bill to reject the Senate's bipartisan proposal to partner with the states in prevention strategies. And the bill before us now provides no additional funds to address what Transportation Secretary LaHood has identified as an epidemic in this country. Traffic accidents caused by distracted driving are on the rise in communities everywhere in this country. In my home county, our police department in Fairfax County reported a 48% increase in the number of citations issued for distracted driving in the last year. A recent study by Virginia Tech Transportation Institute points out 80% of all crashes and 65% of all near crashes involve driver distraction. Nationally, the Department of Transportation reports that more than 416,000 people were injured in distracted driving accidents in 2010. And tragically, Mr. Chairman, 3,100 of those were killed. According to a recent AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety survey, 94% of respondents recognize the risks of talking, texting, or emailing while driving and said such activities are unacceptable. 87% said they support laws against reading, typing, or sending text messages while driving. Yet, more than one-third of those same drivers reported they still read or send text or email while driving. In fact, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration estimates more than 100,000 drivers are texting, more than 600,000 are using their cell phones at any given time in our nation's roadways. Sending or receiving text diverts attention from the road for an average of 4.6 seconds. While that may not seem like a long time, at 55 miles per hour, it's the equivalent of driving the length of a football field without paying attention to the road. A report from the University of Utah goes so far as to say that using a cell phone to talk or text delays a driver's reaction just as much as having a blood alcohol level of 0.8, the legal limit. We congratulate the 39 states in the District of Columbia and Guam for taking steps to ban text messaging for all drivers, but the force of these laws varies. In my home state of Virginia, for example, it's a secondary offense, so drivers cannot be pulled over or cited unless they're breaking some other law deemed more serious. That's why we need to beef up prevention efforts, particularly among younger drivers, Mr. Chairman. I hosted a teen driving summit when I was chairman of Fairfax County a few years ago. Distracted driving is the #1 killer of teen drivers in America. Alcohol-related accidents among teens have thankfully dropped. Teenage traffic fatalities have remained virtually unchanged, however, as a result of the growth of accidents caused by distraction from texting or talking on the phone. What's shocking is that 35% of teens who talk or text while they're behind the wheel actually do not think they'll get hurt. I hear my colleagues talk about their support for traffic safety and efforts to discourage distracted driving, but I don't see any tangible actions to address this challenge in each of our communities. In his blueprint for ending distracted driving, Secretary LaHood endorses efforts to work with the automakers to apply technology being marketed to block cells while in motion, or to improve crash warning and driver monitoring systems to prevent accidents caused by distracted driving. The Secretary has also proposed partnering with states on tougher prevention efforts and public awareness campaigns. Mr. Chairman, today's mobile device-driven society, distracted driving is quickly becoming our greatest obstacle to ensuring safety on our nation's roadways, and it will only get worse. I urge my colleagues to support this simple amendment. It's a modest transfer of funds from an administrative account to increase distracted driving research and prevention efforts. This will save lives. Recently, there was a tragic accident of a young lady driving in Iowa, texting, causing an accident, a fatality. In my home county of Fairfax, when I was chairman, I remember having to talk to the parents, the grieving parents of a young woman who had been texting while driving and wrapped herself around a tree and died a few short blocks from her home. Looking in the face of a parent and having to explain why that could have been prevented is something I hope none of my colleagues ever have to do. I plead with my colleagues on the other side to accept this amendment and save teenage lives. Thank you, and I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa rise?
I thank the gentleman. I rise in opposition to this amendment.
Gentleman's
I
recognized for 5
understand.
minutes. Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. I do rise reluctantly in opposition to this amendment. It takes $5 million from the DOT's financial management capital account and puts it in NHTSA operations for vehicle safety. Let me say that there's no guarantee that they will use this money as the gentleman has talked about. There's no dedication of funds here, obviously. First, this would eliminate half of the funds the DOT has to make sure its financial systems are current. I don't need to tell anyone here how critical it is that DOT's financial systems, which are responsible for the accurate disbursement of many billions of dollars each year, need to be kept in good working state. And second, this would increase the vehicle safety portion of NHTSA's operations. We're already giving this account $12 million more than last year after being frozen for the last 3 years straight. We simply don't need an additional increase. And again, these funds, there's no way to dedicate them to distracted driving. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would urge a no vote.
Gentleman yields back.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back to silence. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I find it a little bit difficult here where we're taking from one place and putting it into another place, and I don't dispute what the chairman has said about not being certain that the money will be used for the right purpose at that point. However, the place where the offset is being made from the Financial Management Capital Program under DOT, that amount leaves that account with the same amount that was in the account in 2012. So that should not be a particularly onerous change on that account, on that score. On the other hand, the issue that the gentleman from Virginia has raised the issue of the distracted driving and how important it is, we are just losing a lot of young people to the distracted driving. There seems to be no sense that being on a cell phone or an iPad or some other one of the common programs that's now available, the IT programs that's now available, that working with that, it doesn't seem to lead to any sense that their driving capacity has been impaired. So in 2010, the NHTSA estimated that more than 3,000 people were killed and more than 400,000 were injured in distracted driving crashes. And Secretary LaHood has made the elimination of distracted driving one of his key safety priorities and has requested funding in each of the last 3 budgets to do that. So it seems to me, with the sense that NHTSA views this issue with 3,000 killed, as they say, in 2010, 2 years ago already, and more than 400,000 injured, and the Secretary's very strong interest in the distracted driving issue, that this would be a perfectly reasonable thing to do, and so I will support the gentleman from Virginia's amendment.
Does the gentleman yield back?
I yield back.
Is there further discussion on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia? If not, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. Being the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, on that matter, I would request a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia will be postponed. The clerk will read.
Page 4, line 8, Homeland Security Initiative, $6 million to remain available through September 30th, 2014. Office of Civil Rights, $9,773,000.
What purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Brown of Georgia, page 4, line 22. After the dollar amount, insert reduced by $389,000. Page 150, line 9. After the dollar amount, insert increased by $389,000.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment is very straightforward. It would simply reduce the overall funding for the Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Transportation by $389,000. This office is one of 13 in the underlying bill, which are slated to receive increases for administrative expenses despite the fiscal emergency that we're currently facing. The passage of this amendment would simply bring this account back to fiscal year 2012 levels. See my good friend from Texas, Ms. Sheila Jackson Lee, and she knows, and I have fought together very hard for civil rights and civil liberties here in this House, in committee, as well as on the floor, and believe very strongly that we need to protect our civil liberties and our civil rights. But the simple truth is that we are broke as a nation. And this amendment would just simply keep funding at the current level instead of raising it. So it would just turn it back, what's proposed in the underlying bill, to the current level of spending. It would not reduce any functions of this office. It would not prohibit this office from doing any of its work. But it would help in a small way to put us back in a more realistic fiscal state as a nation. Because, Mr. Chairman, we just have to stop spending money that we don't have. And it's across the board. Every bureau, every office, every bit of the federal government needs to not have increases in their cost and to the taxpayer, not have further borrowing of money that we just don't have. We've just got to stop spending money we don't have. And so this simple amendment just keeps funding at our current level. And that's all it does. And I urge support of my amendment. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time for what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
I claim time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 5 minutes.
May I yield from that time?
You may.
Do you want it, or do you want it? I'll yield from my time to the gentlelady from Texas.
Yeah. The gentleman from Massachusetts has to remain on his feet. Gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Let me thank the chairman again, and my good friend from Georgia knows that we've had a lot of opportunities to work together on many different issues, and it seems as if he is raising an issue that would have a sense of agreement. But I have to reluctantly but vigorously oppose the gentleman's amendment. The Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Transportation losing the amount of money that he has suggested will deprive that office of viable and important staff and resources for compliance. Frankly, this agency governs huge amounts, billions of dollars of federal dollars. In addition, it governs actions that deal with accommodations, the utilization of dollars for small and minority and disadvantaged businesses. The Civil Rights section has been a section that has ensured that the federal dollars in transportation are used in a way that are not discriminatory. I don't believe we need to be, in 2012, rising to eliminate opportunity. We need to expand opportunity. And the Civil Rights section of the Department of Transportation has always been a consistent and efficient subsection of the agency that has been the guidepost of ensuring that our federal dollars are used appropriately. Used appropriately as it relates to Native Americans. Used appropriately as it relates to Latinos, African Americans, Caucasians. It is a civil rights office that balances and ensures non-discrimination, non-discrimination against the disabled. And I frankly believe that because of the massiveness of that responsibility, particularly as we look at the needs of the disabled in transportation resources or transportation utilization, that it is crucial that we do not cut to the existing amount of dollars. This is not a lot, and so the impact is greater than what the gentleman believes he will have because he suggests that it is a small amount. It's a great impact, and I would ask the gentleman to consider this amendment as one that has a far-reaching impact, and that at this point we do not want to make a statement that civil rights and the equal accommodations that are necessary in the utilization of federal dollars is acceptable, meaning discrimination is acceptable, non-discrimination being, if you will, limited by the funding that has been cut through this amendment. I'd ask that our colleagues oppose the amendment. Gentleman has the time.
Reclaiming my time at this point, I strongly oppose this amendment. I think that in this instance, we should understand that the Office of Civil Rights, its major task is to ensure that discrimination doesn't occur in the implementation of DOT programs. The chairman of the subcommittee has already carefully weighed the needs of the office and made, I think, a responsible judgment as to the correct funding amount, and I urge members to oppose the amendment.
Gentleman yield back his time.
I'll yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa rise?
I would move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from Iowa is recognized for 5 minutes.
And if I will yield to the gentleman. Just let me make a quick statement here. Just so everybody knows, the increase that's in the bill is a simple increase for inflation to pay for costs such as the GSA rent and one extra compensable workday. Transportation is important to all parts and all people in America. I just don't think this is the right cut into taking this kind of a bill. And I think we should always keep in mind that we have on our allocations, we have written the total appropriation bills to the 1028 number rather than 1047. This bill already cuts about $4 billion under last year's funding level. So with that, I express my opposition to the amendment, and I would gladly yield to the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Latham, for yielding. I believe in equal under the law. And we all ought to be considered equal, no matter what color the skin is, no matter who our founding fathers, who our fathers of our own families are, etc. And I think everybody should be treated equal under the law. And certainly, as I stated, I apologize if the gentlelady from Texas thought that I was insinuating that she would agree with this amendment, because I never had any dream that she would, frankly. But with that, I'm introducing a lot of amendments to this bill to keep administrative expenses and salaries for many of the different pieces of this underlying bill, and this is just one of many. But I'm convinced that I need to withdraw this amendment, and I just ask unanimous consent that I withdraw the amendment.
Is there objection? Without objection, the amendment is withdrawn. The clerk will read.
Page 5, line 1, Transportation Planning, Research and Development, $8 million.
What purpose does the gentlelady from California raise?
I have an amendment at the desk, designated waters 162.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Waters of California, page 5, after line 6, insert the following: National Infrastructure Investments. For capital investments in surface transportation infrastructure, $500 million to remain available through September 30th, 2014, provided that the Secretary of Transportation shall distribute funds provided under this heading as discretionary grants to be awarded to a state, local government, transit agency, or a collaboration among such entities on a competitive basis for projects that will have a significant impact on the nation, a metropolitan area, or a region. Provided further.
Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady from California.
Unanimous consent to dispense with the reading.
Is there objection? Without objection, the reading will be dispensed with. For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa rise?
Mr. Chairman, I reserve a point of order for the gentlewoman's amendment.
The gentleman from Iowa reserves a point of order. The gentlelady from California is recognized for 5 minutes on her amendment.
I thank the Chair, and I thank my colleagues Betty McCollum, Barbara Lee, Emmanuel Cleaver, Karen Bass, Laura Richardson, and Bobby Rush, Dot Matsui, all for co-sponsoring this amendment. Our amendment will provide $500 million for the Tiger program, which creates jobs through investments in transportation infrastructure. The economy is struggling to recover from the recession. The unemployment rate has remained above 8% nationally for 40 straight months and is even higher in minority communities and in many areas of the country. Meanwhile, the American Society of Civil Engineers 2009 report card for America's infrastructure estimated that there is a $549.5 billion shortfall in investments in roads and bridges, and an additional $190.1 billion shortfall in investments in transit. Tiger, formerly known as Transportation Investment Generating Economic Recovery, is a nationwide competitive grant program that creates jobs by funding investments in transportation infrastructure by states, local governments, and transit agencies. Tiger funds projects that will have a significant impact on our nation's highway and transit infrastructure. Tiger would finance a wide variety of innovative highway, bridge, and transit projects in urban and rural communities all across this country, provided there is sufficient funding. One such project is the Crenshaw LAX Transit Corridor in Los Angeles County, a light rail project that will run through my district. Tiger grants could be used to finance stations along this corridor in the communities of Leimert Park and Westchester, thereby ensuring that these communities have access to light rail. According to Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood, these are innovative 21st century projects that will change the U.S. transportation landscape by strengthening the economy and creating jobs, reducing gridlock, and providing safe, affordable, and environmentally sustainable transportation choices. Tiger received an appropriation of $500 million in funding year 2012, and the President requested $500 million for the program in funding year 2013. Unfortunately, that does not include any funding for Tiger. Our amendment would create jobs by funding Tiger at the requested level without cutting funding for other programs. Last week, I introduced H.R. 5976, the Tiger Grants for Job Creation Act, which would provide a supplemental emergency appropriation of $1 billion over the next 2 years for the Tiger program. And 44 of my colleagues have already co-sponsored this bill. And so I would ask my colleagues to take a look at what is happening in our economy. I think we can all agree this economy needs stimulating. And certainly, I'm not talking about stimulating for just stimulating for stimulating's sake. I'm talking about stimulating for job creation and for the repair of the infrastructure of this country. We have too many bridges that have been rated unsafe. We saw what happened in Minnesota just a couple of years ago when the bridge fell, and I want to tell you, when the bridges start to fall and the infrastructure simply disintegrates, we're all going to sit around and scratch our heads and say how sorry we are. We're going to go to our constituents and tell them we will never let it happen again. We have the opportunity to get in the forefront of providing this stimulus to our economy and creating jobs. Our constituents want to work. They want jobs. And so I would urge my colleagues to support the Tiger Amendment, invest in our crumbling infrastructure, and create good jobs in communities across the United States. And I would yield the balance of my time to the gentlelady from Ohio.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding and rise in support of the Waters Tiger Grant Amendment. I agree with the gentlelady that there's no stronger job creator than investment in transportation, bridges, transit systems, overpasses, passenger rail, port development. It makes America more efficient and it makes us more competitive, and there's never been a more critical moment than now to do it. You know, as kids we used to sing this song, London Bridge is falling down, London Bridge is falling down, 1, 2, 3, and we all fall down. Well, we saw that what happened in Minnesota when that bridge fell down. Well, in Cleveland, the Interbelt Bridge project did not receive the $125 million it needed to replace the aging I-90 bridge. And
time of the gentlelady has expired.
Time
of the gentlelady has expired. What purpose the gentleman from Iowa rise?
Mr. Chairman, I make a point of order against the amendment because it proposes to change existing law and constitutes legislation and appropriation bill, and therefore violates Clause 2 of Rule 21. The rule states in pertinent part, an amendment to a general appropriations bill should not be in order if it is changing existing law. The amendment gives affirmative direction in effect and imposes additional duties. And, Mr. Chairman, I ask for a ruling of the Chair.
Does any member wish to be heard on the point of order? What purpose does the gentlelady from California rise?
I rise to speak on the point of order.
Gentlelady is recognized.
In the limited time that we have to speak on these important issues, I have tried to point out the high unemployment in this country and how we can put Americans to work repairing crumbling roads and building transit facilities across our great country. I don't see any need to have to expand on this anymore. I think the point is perfectly clear that we need to fund this Tiger grant. With the economy still struggling to recover from the recession and millions of Americans looking for work, we should not be arguing about offsets. Tiger has always been funded through the appropriations process. Tiger was first created.
To the point of order.
The point of order being that a point of order has been raised because there is no offset. And I agree, there is no offset. But I make the point that we have such a critical need for jobs and investment in our infrastructure and this economy that we should not stop this from going forward simply because of the offset. We can afford to fund investment in this country. That's my opposition to the point of order.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. Does any other member wish to be heard on the point of order? What purpose does the gentlelady from Texas rise? Gentlelady is recognized.
First of all, I want to congratulate the gentlelady from California for an insightful amendment and understand the dilemma that the chairman of the subcommittee is in. But what I would suggest is that we are in such a crisis as relates to both jobs, the needs of urban America, rural America, that the point of order should be waived. And it can be waived. We have waived points of order on a number of occasions. In this instance, I think we have a moment when you have zeroed out, for whatever the purposes or reasons for zeroed out, there's not even minimal amount of monies in the Tiger funding, none at all. And having just left my district on this past Friday, receiving $15 million in Tiger grants, the first that the city of Houston, the fourth largest city in the nation, has ever received. But in that granting, there were urban and rural grantees that were able to create jobs. We claim...
She must address her remarks to the point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so my argument would be that because of the crisis, the economic crisis, that this is warranting a waiver of the point of order so the gentlelady's amendment can go forward, $500 million that will be utilized to create jobs, to rebuild urban and rural America, and I'd ask that the point of order be waived. With that, I yield back.
Does any other member wish to be heard? What purpose does the gentlelady from Ohio rise?
I rise to speak against the point of order.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I thank the chairman for yielding and wish to say, you know, it's amazing what we can find money for and what we can't find money for. When Wall Street came in here in a flash in a weekend, $700 billion walked out the door, 1,000 times more than the gentlelady is asking for. And it would seem to me that with this point of order, there's never been a more critical time in our country to waive it in order to do the job of America. I mentioned the Minneapolis bridge that collapsed. Well, I can tell you we have one in Cleveland that's ready to do the same. It's the same design. What could be more important than investing in this country, creating jobs and meeting these unmet national needs? In western Ohio, we have McCord Road, the site of a major Norfolk Southern Main Line and Amtrak, and young people were killed there at grade, and now they've delayed that project decades rather than doing the kind of grade crossing that's needed. You know, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, you can talk about points of order, but the most important point of order is to keep the nation in order. And I think the most important way we can do that is to keep this transportation funding flowing, making our nation more competitive, creating jobs, and leaving a legacy to the future better than we found it. So I strongly support the gentlelady's amendment and object to the point of order and ask, along with my colleagues, that it be waived.
Gentlelady yields back her time. Does any further member wish to speak on the point of order? If not, the chair is prepared to rule. The chair finds that this amendment includes language imparting direction to the Secretary of Transportation. The amendment therefore constitutes legislation in violation of Clause 221. The point of order is sustained and the amendment is not in order. The clerk will read.
Page 5, line 7, Working Capital Fund, $174,128,000. Minority Business Resource Center Program, $418,000. In addition, for administrative expenses, $867,000, $388. Minority Business Outreach, $3,234,000. to remain available until September 30th, 2014. Payments to air carriers, Airport and Airway Trust Fund, $114 million.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. McClintock of California, page 6, line 23. After the dollar amount, insert reduced by $0. Page 150, line 9. After the dollar amount, insert increased by $114 million.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If the House is to live up to the promises the Republican majority made to the American people to bring spending under control, some tough choices are going to have to be made. This amendment, however, is not one of them. This is about the easiest choice that the House could possibly make, to put an end to the so-called essential air service that lavishly subsidizes some of the least essential air services in the country. This program shells out nearly $200 million a year, including $114 million of direct taxpayer subsidies, to support empty and near-empty flights from selected airports in tiny communities, most of which are just a few hours' drive from major airports. A reporter recently investigating this waste took one of these flights from Ely, Nevada, and was the only passenger on that flight. Our constituents paid $1.8 million for this air service that carried just 227 passengers during the entire year. Ely is a 3.5-hour drive from Salt Lake City International Airport. Thief River Falls, Minnesota is considered an essential air service airport, despite the fact that it's just 1 hour and 9 minutes drive to Grand Forks International Airport in North Dakota. Hagerstown is just 75 miles from Baltimore, but subsidizing their air flights are considered an essential air service. Now, it's true there are a few tiny communities in Alaska, like Cake's 700 hardy souls, that have no highway connections to hub airports, but they've got plenty of alternatives. In the case of Cake, Alaska, they enjoy year-round ferry service to Juneau. In addition, Alaska is well served by a thriving general aviation market and the ubiquitous Bush pilot. Rural life has both great advantages and great disadvantages, but it is not the job of hard-working taxpayers who choose to live elsewhere to level out the differences. Now, apologists for this wasteful spending tell us that it's an important economic driver for these small towns, and I'm sure that's so. Whenever you give away money, the folks you're giving it to are always better off. But the folks you're taking it away from are always worse off to exactly the same extent. Indeed, it's economic drivers like this that have driven Greece's economy right off a cliff. An airline so reckless with its funds as to manage its affairs in such a ludicrous way would quickly bankrupt itself. As we can plainly see, the same principle holds true for governments. This was a temporary program set up when we deregulated commercial aviation during the Carter administration. It was supposed to last a few years to give rural communities a chance to adjust. That was 34 years ago. In 2010, in one of the most decisive congressional elections in American history, voters entrusted the House to Republicans with a crystal clear mandate: stop wasting our money. Last year, the House responded to this mandate by voting to eliminate essential air service subsidies in the FAA reauthorization bill. So what's the response of the House Appropriations Committee? They do not eliminating funding for this wasteful program. They do not reduce funding for it. No, they increase funding by 11% in a single year to a new historic high. Mr. Chairman, our nation is borrowing 40 cents of every dollar that it's spending. It has lost its AAA credit rating. Its taxpayers are exhausted. Its treasury is empty. Its children are staggering under a mountain of debt that will impoverish them for years to come. And yet the House Appropriations Committee, in defiance of last year's decision by the House to eliminate this program, has just voted a double-digit percentage increase for a program that flies near empty planes around the country. I think we can do better than that. I offer instead this amendment to stop fleecing taxpayers for this expensive folly. I believe that House Republicans will ultimately prove themselves worthy of the trust the American people have given them in this perilous hour in our nation's history. I believe that House Republicans can summon the fortitude to save our country from financial wreck and ruin. And I offer this amendment to put that faith to a modest test. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
Mr. Chairman, I claim time in opposition.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I think what we have is a rather classical kind of a situation. The gentleman from California, I suspect, has no essential air service site in his district, but there are 100 communities, more than 100 communities around the country, some of them in very isolated circumstances. I don't know about the situation in the case of the one from Baltimore, but it must be somebody who's on the East Shore and gets some essential air service out of Cambridge, Maryland, or some other place like that, that is of great significance to them and might be of some significance to the person who represents that eastern shore of Maryland. He uses several times the example of, in several ways, the example of Alaska. Well, Alaska happens to be a territory with huge distances and relatively unpopulated, and they don't have any roads in much of Alaska, and so the only way that they can get in and out is by air, or maybe in the wintertime by dog sled. So I think it's really presumptive of the gentleman from California to attack all of this program of essential air services, covering services in a lot of the rural parts of this country. I have none in my district. Many of the urban areas obviously do not have any in their area. But the Montanas and the much more rural states, places elsewhere in the mountain states and so on, there are numerous of them that use the essential air service, and I think that the idea of simply zeroing this one out in a petulance almost is really quite inappropriate. So I strongly oppose the amendment and hope that the members will not agree to this amendment.
Gentleman yields back his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa rise?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. I rise in opposition to the gentleman's amendment. The Essential Air Service Program ensures that small and rural communities have access to the national air transportation system. This program plays a key role in the economic development of many rural communities by ensuring that air service continues. Does the program need reform? Absolutely. That's why last year we capped the program to existing communities and have removed the requirement that larger and more expensive planes must be used in the program. In addition, the authorizers institute a $1,000 per passenger subsidy cap and limited participation in the program to communities that have more than 10 enplanements per day. This amendment would be devastating to at least 150 rural communities in a place like Iowa. It plays an essential role as far as the economic development of those communities. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I urge defeat of the amendment, and I will yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. Is there further discussion on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California? If not, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. As many as are in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Gentleman from California.
On that, I'd ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote is ordered pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California rise?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to strike the last word.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise to commend Congresswoman Maxine Waters for offering her amendment, her Tiger Grant amendment. The Transportation Investment Generating Economic Recovery, or Tiger Grant program, invests in innovative road, rail, transit, and port projects. Projects funded through Tiger strengthen the economy, create jobs, reduce traffic, and provide safe, affordable, and environmentally sustainable transportation projects. Tiger delivers projects faster and saves taxpayers' dollars by reducing construction costs. In my Los Angeles district, Tiger has provided significant opportunity. In fact, Tiger has provided resources for the Crenshaw-LAX Transit Corridor Project, a light rail line that will connect key communities to the Los Angeles International Airport. I look forward to continue working with my respected colleague, Maxine Waters, to advocate for a comprehensive, community-valued Crenshaw-LAX Transit Corridor project that will include a station at Vernon Avenue in the historic Leimert Park Village, a neighborhood which serves as the central arts and cultural hub of Los Angeles County's African American program. The Tiger Grant program is critical to the success of the Crenshaw-LAX light rail line, as well as many projects like it throughout the country. I'm sorry that the amendment was ruled out of order. I think that that was a mistake on our part, and I yield back the rest of my time.
She yields back her time. The clerk will read.
Page 8, line 1, Administrative Provisions, Office of the Secretary of Transportation, Section 101. None of the funds made available may be obligated to approve assessments pertaining to funds appropriated to the modal administrations. Section 102, the Secretary may engage in activities with states related to the reduction of motorcycle fatalities. Section 103, the Department's Working Capital Fund is authorized to provide payments in advance to vendors to carry out Federal Transit Pass Transportation Benefit Program. Section 104, the Secretary shall post on the website a schedule of all meetings of the Credit Council. Federal Aviation Administration Operations, Airport and Airway Trust Fund, $9,718 million.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan rise?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment. Does he have a point of order?
Amendment offered by Mr. Clark of Michigan, page 9, line 18. After the dollar amount, insert reduced by $10 million. Page 9, line 25. After the dollar amount, insert reduced by $5 million. Page 10, line 3. After the dollar amount, insert reduced by $5 million. Page 49, line 9. After the dollar amount, insert increased by $10 million.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa rise?
Mr. Chairman, I reserve a point of order.
The gentleman from Iowa reserves a point of order on the amendment. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My amendment would add $10 million to the Federal Transit Administration's formula and bus grants. And I do this to give our elderly and physically disabled a chance to get around their community. Many of our disabled and elderly aren't working. They don't have the money to afford a car, to afford car insurance, especially in the city of Detroit where insurance rates are really prohibitive for many people. This allocation of an additional $10 million would provide the elderly and our citizens who are physically disabled with the mobility that they need to enjoy their lives. And I urge your support.
Gentleman yield back his time.
And I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Iowa rise?
Object in the bill.
Mr. Chairman, the amendment proposes to amend, I must insist my point of order, proposes to amend portions of the bill that have not been read. The amendment may not be considered in block because of Clause 2F of Rule 21, because the amendment does not propose to transfer funds among objects in the bill as required by Clause 2F. And I would ask for a ruling of the Chair.
Does any member wish to be heard on the amendment or on the point of order? The gentleman from Michigan is recognized on the point of order.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would request that the bill be read in, to the extent that the gentleman had an issue about the bill not being read.
Does the gentleman ask unanimous consent that the bill be read to incorporate the en bloc amendment?
I do, Mr. Chair.
Is there objection?
Object.
Objections heard. Does the gentleman, any member wish to be heard on the amendment? If not, the Chair is prepared to rule. To be considered en bloc pursuant to Clause 2F of Rule 21, an amendment must propose only to transfer appropriations among objects in the bill. Because the amendment offered by the gentleman from Michigan proposes also another kind of change in the bill, namely increasing a limitation on obligations from the Highway Trust Fund, it may not avail itself of Clause 2F to address portions of the bill not yet read. Therefore, the amendment is not in order. Order is sustained. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California rise?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise today in support of the Waters, McCullen, Lee, Cleaver, Bass, Richardson, Rush, Matsui amendment, which unfortunately was not found in order, and I would hope that the members here, the leadership, would reconsider that decision. I'm strongly in support of seeking to restore the $500 million for an additional year of the widely popular and highly successful, might I say, Tiger Grant program. As a member of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, and as a representative of one of the most transportation-intensive infrastructure districts in the country, I know how important it is to maintain efficient transportation infrastructure that will help our country remain competitive globally throughout this country and in the world. The Tiger program enables DOT to use a rigorous process to select projects with exceptional benefits to explore ways to deliver projects faster and to save on construction costs. It also enabled to make investments in our nation's infrastructure and to make communities more livable and sustainable. The 2012 Tiger IV program received 703 grant applications requesting a total of $10.2 billion from all 50 states, including the U.S. territories and the District of Columbia. The first 3 Tiger programs received nearly 2,250 applications, requesting more than $95 billion. Now, some might say, certainly we must have our financial house in order, and we have to really look at how we spend the dollars that are available. But I would argue before the committee today that Tiger Grants was actually a program that was used. It was well monitored. The programs were brought forward, and they were done at a benefit not only for the funding initially of those programs, but for the jobs that they provided as well. Clearly, there's a need for an additional investment in our country's infrastructure. We have reports in my area, for example, in California, of many of the roads and the highways where we receive a D grade due to the lack of the quality of infrastructure in our community. Of the 47 projects that were funded in the most recent round of Tiger grants, nearly 16% went specifically to port infrastructure, according to the American Association of Port Authorities, which calculated $69.7 million would be directed to the ports. Funding these projects is crucial to the U.S. port facilities. It supports 13.3 million jobs and accounts for $3.15 trillion in business activity that by having better roads and infrastructure we can continue, and the Tiger Grants helps us to do that. In addition to restoring the full $500 million for the Tiger program, I believe that the conference report that comes before this body should contain the Senate's MAPS 21 National Freight Program and the Projects of National and Regional Significance Program. Since coming to Congress, I have advocated for a national freight program and policy, and that's why I introduced H.R. 1122, the Freight Focus Act. The Freight Focus Act establishes the Office of Freight Planning and Development within the Department of Transportation to coordinate a national freight policy. By creating a National Freight Advisory Committee, private and public sector entities would have direct input into funding priorities and planning. The National Freight Program would provide over $2 billion a year to upgrade our nation's goods movement system. That equates to $336 million to the state of California alone over 2 years for freight infrastructure upgrades. These funds are critical to areas like mine, a district where over 40% of our entire nation's cargo goes through the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach and ultimately through my district. In addition to MAP 21, which would authorize $1 billion for the projects of national and regional significance, according to the Bloomberg government report, the cost of congestion to the trucking industry totaled $23 billion in 2010. Almost a quarter of the cost of congestion to the entire economy. Investing in key intermodal links such as the Gerald Desmond Bridge, which was a project that was funded through the Projects of National Significance, these links and the jobs that are associated to them are vital to us moving goods throughout this country. Without programs like Tiger and PNRS, critical infrastructure like the Gerald Desmond Bridge that has a diaper underneath it catching concrete, which Chairman Mica visited and saw himself, these types of bridges would continue to crumble and put a vital link to our nation's largest seaports to consumers at risk. I would like to encourage my colleagues to accept, even though it's been initially found out of order, to reconsider that effort and hope as we go forward there would be a greater precedence as the committee report comes out for the National Freight Program and the projects of regional significance. I look forward to the decision and support in the future.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan rise?
Mr. Chair, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do understand the procedural limitations raised by the gentleman from Iowa on my amendment. My goal here was to provide those citizens with physical disabilities some way to get around their community, because many times, even if they can afford to buy a vehicle or auto insurance, they may not be able to drive that vehicle. And I look forward to working with the subcommittee chair, the gentleman from Iowa, on other ways that we could better serve our citizens who are elderly and who have physical disabilities. And I yield back my time.
Okay, you're up right there.
Or I yield my time to the gentleman from Iowa. I yield my time to the gentleman from Iowa.
The gentleman yields to the gentleman from Iowa.
If the gentleman would yield, I'd just say I would hope the authorizers come back with a robust number for you, and that we'll be happy to try to work with the gentleman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The clerk will read.
Page 12, line 8, Facilities and Equipment, Airport and Airway Trust Fund, $2,749,596,000. Research, Engineering, and Development, including rescission of funds, Airport and Airway Trust Fund, $175 million. Grants and aid for airports, liquidation of contract authorization, limitation on
Madam
obligations,
Chairman.
Airport and Airway Trust Fund.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa seek recognition?
Madam Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that the remainder of the bill through page 34, line 23, be considered as read, printed to the record, and open to amendment at any point.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. Are there any amendments to that question of the bill, portion of the bill? If not, the clerk will read.
Page 35, line 1, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration Operations and Research, $152,200,000 of which $20 million shall remain available through September 30, 2014. Operations and research, liquidation of contract authorization, limitation on obligations, Highway Trust Fund, $122,360,000.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa?
Madam Chairwoman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Braley of Iowa, page 35, line 16, after the dollar amount insert reduced by $10 million, increased by $10 million. Page 35, line 21, after the dollar amount insert reduced by $10 million, increased by $10 million. Page 35, line 22, after the dollar amount insert reduced by $10 million, increased by $10 million.
The gentleman from Iowa is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chairwoman, and I want to make a specific point of emphasizing that I'm offering this amendment in honor of one of the gentlemen from Iowa's constituents, a young 7-year-old girl named Caden Halverson, who on May 10th of 2011 was struck and killed by a pickup truck while exiting a school bus. And this particular section of the bill deals with the report language that talks about, among other things, the ability to talk about safety and pupil transportation relating to the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration. So to understand the purpose behind this amendment, it's important to know how this tragedy happened. This young girl was crossing the street to board her school bus. The bus had its red lights flashing, the stop arm was activated, and a pickup truck traveling at 60 miles an hour struck and killed her. The driver tested positive for marijuana and later pleaded guilty to vehicular homicide and has been sentenced to 15 years in prison. Now, this is one isolated incident in my home state, but statistics show that 13 million violations occur in this country every year of vehicles passing stopped school buses. It's obvious we have a serious problem, and my amendment would use this funding for the purpose of working with states to create tougher sanctions and tougher enforcement to reduce this alarming problem of people violating the law and passing stopped school buses. The intent of my amendment is to require the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, otherwise known as NHTSA, to prioritize at least $10 million for school bus safety work, and specifically to work with state and local law enforcement to improve enforcement of state law concerning illegally passing stopped school buses. My amendment would ensure that we are enforcing the laws on the books pertaining to stopping those school buses. It's a part of an ongoing effort to provide safety to kids who are going to school and returning every day. 13 million violations a year is way too many. We have an obligation to work with states. My amendment would do that by directing NHTSA to use this opportunity to help those states become more effective in preventing these tragedies. It wasn't the only one that has become of significance in my state in the past year. 11-year-old Justin Bradfield of Janesville, Iowa, was tragically killed in 2011 after being struck by a school bus. That's why earlier this year I introduced Caden's Act in the House. The bill would encourage states to toughen their penalties for those found guilty of passing a stopped school bus. I'm honored to have the subcommittee chairman as a co-sponsor of that legislation. I hope that my colleagues will support this amendment, and I urge them to work to pass both these bills to make it safer for our kids.